Today, we are diving headfirst into one of the most epic conflicts in all of history, the civil war that brought the 500-year-old Roman Republic crashing down. And this isn't just a story about two powerful guys fighting it out. It's the ultimate story of how a superpower can rot from the inside.
So, I want you to picture this. The date is August 9th, 48 BC. We're on the hot, dusty plains of central Greece. Two Roman armies are facing each other, ready for battle. But this isn't some foreign conquest. No, this is brother against brother. This is a fight for the very soul of Rome.
On one side, you've got Pompey the Great. On the other, Gaius Julius Caesar. These guys were once family, father and son-in-law. Now they're mortal enemies, and everything, absolutely everything, is on the line. This battle, the showdown at Farsalus, it's more than just a battle. It's the last bloody gasp of a republic that's been dying for 100 years.
Now, if you were a betting man, you'd put all your money on Pompey. On paper, he should win, hands down. He's got almost twice the infantry and a ridiculous 5-to-1 advantage in cavalry. His camp is full of senators who are so confident they're already arguing about who gets what job in Rome after they win. And then there's Caesar. His army is smaller, exhausted, practically starving. But his men are veterans. They've spent a decade fighting brutal wars in Gaul, and their loyalty isn't to Rome, it's to him.
So this is the big question, right? How does a political system that lasted for half a millennium end up here, with its two greatest heroes locked in a fight to the death where only one can walk away? To really understand what's about to happen on this battlefield, you have to understand the disease that had already hollowed out the Republic.
The truth is, this civil war didn't just pop up out of nowhere with Caesar and Pompey. The Republic was already on life support long before they ever drew their swords. This conflict, it wasn't the cause of the collapse, it was the final violent symptom.
I love this quote because it just nails the situation perfectly. All the pieces of the Republic were still there. You had the Senate, you had elections, all the old offices. But it was just an empty shell. The real power, the real authority was gone. It was all a performance, a facade, while the real game was being played with private armies and personal ambition.
Yeah, this breakdown was a long time coming. Think of it as a slow-motion car crash over 100 years. It really kicks off back in 133 BC when two politicians, the Gracchi brothers, are literally clubbed to death by their fellow senators just for trying to pass reforms for the poor. A few decades later, a general named Sulla just decides to march his army on Rome itself, makes himself dictator, and posts kill lists of his enemies. By the time we get to our main characters, politics isn't about debates anymore, it's about daggers.
And at the heart of all this rot was this deep, nasty political divide. You basically had two teams. On one side, the Optimates, the best men. These were the old-school conservative aristocrats who wanted to keep all the power with the Senate. On the other side were the Populares, the people's men. They were ambitious guys who used their popularity with the common people to bypass the Senate and get things done. Caesar was the ultimate popularis, and Pompey, well, he ended up being the champion for the Optimates.
So you see, the whole system was just failing on every level. You had extreme inequality, with a tiny handful of elites getting obscenely rich while regular farmers lost their land. Corruption was everywhere. But the most dangerous crack in the foundation? The army. Soldiers weren't loyal to the Senate and people of Rome anymore. They were loyal to the general who paid them, who promised them land after they retired. You didn't have a national army. You had a collection of private armies.
And into this total mess step three men who look at the broken system and decide, you know what? If the rules don't work, we'll just make our own. This First Triumvirate wasn't a fix. It was like pouring gasoline on the fire.
Now, you have to understand, this was not an official government group. It was a private deal, a handshake in a back room where three guys agreed to pool their power to get around the Senate and push their own agendas. It was a direct attack on how the Republic was supposed to function.
And each of them brought something powerful to the table. Pompey was the military superstar. Crassus was the money man, seriously, the richest guy in Rome. And Caesar was the master politician, the one the people loved. Together, they were basically unstoppable. They'd effectively privatized the government.
But here's the problem with an alliance built on nothing but ambition. It's a ticking time bomb. It was only a matter of time before these three massive egos clashed. And when the bomb finally went off, it was the Republic that got caught in the blast.
So it all started to unravel. First, the human glue holding them together dissolves. Caesar's daughter, who was married to Pompey, tragically dies. Then, a year later, Crassus gets himself killed in a battle out east. So the three-legged stool is suddenly down to two legs, just Caesar and Pompey staring each other down. Pompey gets nervous about Caesar's incredible success in Gaul, and he makes his move. He sides with his old enemies, the conservatives in the Senate.
This was it, the final move in the chess match. The Senate, with Pompey now as their enforcer, tells Caesar he has to give up his command and his army. But for Caesar, this wasn't a choice, it was a death sentence. He knew that if he returned to Rome as a private citizen, his enemies would immediately put him on trial and have him exiled or executed. So Caesar is completely cornered. His career, his reputation, his life, it's all on the line. He has a stark choice: give up and face certain political ruin, or cross a small river called the Rubicon, the legal boundary of his province, and plunge the entire Roman world into civil war.
He made his choice. With the famous words, Alia jacta est, the die is cast, Caesar led his army across the river and into Italy. There was no turning back now. The war for the future of Rome was on.
Which brings us right back to where we started, 19 months later on that field in Greece. After a long and bloody chase across half the known world, the final decisive battle is about to begin. It all comes down to this one day.
Pompey's whole strategy rested on his cavalry. The plan was simple: let Caesar's infantry attack his center, hold them there, and then unleash his thousands of horsemen to smash into Caesar's flank and roll up his entire army. It was a classic by-the-book plan. The only problem? He wasn't facing a by-the-book general.
And this is where we see the genius of Caesar. He knew exactly what Pompey was going to do. He anticipated the whole thing. So as Pompey's cavalry came thundering around the side, Caesar sprang his trap. He had a hidden fourth line of his toughest veterans. At the perfect moment, he gives the signal and they pivot to face the charge head-on. Pompey's horsemen had no idea they were there.
This is the moment that wins the battle. Caesar gives an order that is just brutally effective. He tells his men not to throw their javelins, but to use them as pikes and to thrust upwards, aiming for the faces and eyes of the riders. It was absolutely terrifying and pure psychological warfare.
See, Pompey's cavalry was made up of the young, rich kids of Rome's elite, and the thought of getting their handsome faces permanently disfigured, they panicked. They broke and they ran, completely abandoning Pompey's infantry and leaving their flank wide open. Caesar's trap worked perfectly. In a matter of moments, Pompey's entire army just disintegrated.
And that's the key takeaway here. Pompey stood in his tent and watched in total shock as his invisible army was destroyed. What was shattered on that field wasn't just a military force, it was the entire political order of the old Republic that Pompey was supposed to be defending.
Caesar's victory at Farsalus was one of the most decisive in all of history. The consequences would change Rome and really the entire future of Western civilization forever.
The fallout was swift and brutal. Pompey flees to Egypt, hoping for safety, but he's murdered the moment he steps on the beach. All the key senators who fought against Caesar, including guys like Brutus and Cicero, surrender. And Caesar returns to Rome, where he's eventually named dictator for life. The old system was well and truly dead.
Now, of course, Caesar himself gets assassinated a few years later because senators were terrified he'd make himself king. But it was too late. You couldn't unscramble that egg. His death just kicked off another round of civil wars. And the man who came out on top of that mess was Caesar's young heir, Octavian, who would soon take the name Augustus and become Rome's very first emperor. This quote just sums it all up. The Roman eagle, which used to be a symbol of the Senate and the people, now became the personal symbol of one man's absolute power. The great experiment in shared government was over, replaced by an empire. And this is why this story still matters so much. The fall of Rome became the great cautionary tale for all of Western history. When the American founding fathers were designing their new government, they were obsessed with this story. The entire US system of checks and balances, separation of powers, civilian control of the military, it was all designed with one goal: to make sure no single person could ever do what Caesar did. And that leaves us with this final, timeless question. The story of Caesar and Pompey is a stark warning that republics are fragile, they aren't permanent. They depend on everyone agreeing to play by the rules and respect the institutions. When that trust erodes, the door swings wide open for ambition to crush the rule of law. It's a question that every single generation has to keep asking itself.